Hello, Victoria.
Hi, Mitch, and hi, everyone who's watching. Sorry we're late, internet connection issues, but hey, we're here now. So thank you all very much for joining us. And I'm Victoria O'Brien from New Conservative, and of course we have with us this evening Mitchell Maxbury, our resident political guru for the US. So Mitch, thank you very much. And I understand, of course, that we've managed to grab you this evening from TV3. Is that right?
That's correct. TV3 had asked me to do an interview with them, and after some consideration and having a talk with you, I turned them down.
Very good. So I'm very grateful for that. So what we're talking about here tonight is not just the US election, but just very quickly about the New Zealand election. But then turning to say a little bit on the US political situation, because this is all election year. The last time this happened was 12 years ago, when we had both the New Zealand elections and the US elections both happening in the same year and very close together, of course. So the last time was, as I said, 12 years ago, when John Key was first elected to be Prime Minister. And that was the start of 3 terms for him. And the last time this happened for the US, it was Barack Obama, who started his 2 years. So, Mitch, you were in New Zealand for both of those, weren't you?
Yeah, I was here during all of that time, but I've still been able to vote. The first time that Obama ran was against Mitt Romney, and the second was against John McCain. And those were both interesting campaigns, because both Republican candidates are what I refer to as rhinos, Republican in name only, and neither one of them represented any conservative values at all. So from an American perspective on that particular issue, what becomes interesting is, would you prefer to have the opposition party being, let's say, anti-gun, or would you prefer to have your own head of your party as president being anti-gun? So there's actually a point there where you're actually better off having the opposition win, and he's in the opposing party and he's the anti-gun. So now we can go back and replace the presidential candidate that we had, either McCain or Romney, and try and get that straightened out, which is what basically ended up happening later on.
So do you think that might be what is happening? Do you think that is what is happening here?
It's an interesting point, because I have to go back about 2 days ago. What I refer to as Judas Collins, or Car Crusher Collins, stated that I think it was 8 or 9 minutes into her interview about the review of the election, that she said that the gun control laws were working. And it's like, I don't think she understands what she's talking about. So she's still under this mystification that because they had proposed and supported the gun law, the first tranche, that it really did something good, when in fact it didn't. It did right the opposite. So the question is that you raised, is it better to have lost this election in the fashion we did? And you have to look at it prospectively, and it's like losing this election from national to labor may not be completely bad, because labor is going to have to take the entire brunt of what it is they do for the next 3 years. But the sad part about the current election is that we now have a communist government. And I'll be totally blunt about it. Her being the socialist president of the Youth International from 2008 till 2010. And then she was asked just a short time ago about, she was going on about comrade. And that's an operative word for the communist. And she said, oh, no, it must have been 2004. Well, the interviewer came back and said, oh, no, that was 2009. And that's why you were in Parliament. So she said, and then he asked the other question that was really interesting. Has there been anything to change any of that? And she said, no. So she's admitting now she's full socialist. And then you have to look whether you're going to be a Marxist or you're going to have to be a Leninist. And we're sort of in between those 2 points right now. And as I had stated before, I've had police visits, and they came and questioned me. The first thing they said was, "Think you're a Trump supporter?"
Yeah.
Right. And I said, yeah, I voted for him. So we're somewhere between Marxism, Leninism, but certainly into fascism.
So back to what happened in the US. So with Obama, and of course he managed to stay in for 2 full terms, which is all he was able to do. And then can you just give us a very quick background about what happened with the gun control situation in the US during that time? And then what do you think actually brought Trump back, or brought the Republicans back and then Trump into the picture? So
Okay.
4 years ago.
That's a pretty loaded question. Obama comes from the liberal Democrats in Chicago, which is basically a group of communists. And I'm not exaggerating in the least. There is a communist party in Chicago, which he's associated with. Daimler, who's what's his name? Daimler, the writer that's over here in New Zealand, is also from that same mix of people. So the Democratic platform has always been to remove certain types of firearms from the general populace. And now that you're moving into the United Nations issue over here in New Zealand now, that's going for all guns, not just some. So we've already gone through 2 tranches of gun laws. Now we're going into the third. After Jacinda gets in and sworn in and Parliament seated, it'll be happening again. So Obama has been following the party line. And when you get into the end of his election and then Trump decides to run, Trump I've been following for 20, 25 years, I suppose. And he made a comment a long time ago. He says he would only run for president if things got really bad. Well, they did get really bad. And his son is a competitive shooter, or has competed at Kent Perry, when I was actually on the line. I didn't know he was there, but I was there that year that he did shoot. So we have a friend in the White House right now, but apparently we have no friends in Parliament right now. So we've got a big issue of what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks, which is the U.S. election. And then we have to worry about the Senate and the House of Representatives. And I was just looking at the polls today, and it's about a 50-50 split. So it could potentially go either way. But at least by having a 3-part system to a government, where you've got the executive, you got the legislative, which is your Congress, and then the judicial, you can review anything that is going to come out of the Senate or representatives and potentially be vetoed by the president. And if not, if it goes against the Constitution, go to judicial review and the Supreme Court and get thrown out. We do not have that luxury in New Zealand. If Parliament passes a law, then the judiciary in New Zealand cannot stop it. And this goes back to what we talked about before, the 1688 revolt, where Parliament has full power over the laws and the judiciary cannot stop it. So that's pretty much what I've got on that.
So can you talk a little bit about the end of Obama's term and what you saw there in the feeling in the general population that made it possible for Trump to actually win? And then I'll ask you about what has happened since.
Well, that's a real big one, because right now, after 3.5 years, we're having James Barr starting to bring proceedings against people like Hunter Biden. It will eventually get to Joe Biden. It will go to Hillary. It will go to Obama. It will end up going with Clapper and Brennan, the CIA and NSA, for their participation of submitting information to the FISA court, which is a secret court to do investigations with, on illegal information that they submitted. So we're going to start seeing these prosecutions. Now, my concern is we've only got 2 weeks left, but keep in mind, the next president is not sworn in until about the 1st of February, thereabouts. So we still got a little bit of time for prosecution to come out of that. Let me say something else that's, and I don't want to sound racist by what I'm going to say, when they did the exit polling, and both of the times that Obama ran for president, 97% of the black people on the exit polls were questioned or came back with a response that, yeah, they had voted for Obama. And it's kind of like, well, what ethnic group goes to that extreme of a vote except for being racist? So what we have to watch out for are the long-term consequences of minorities voting in a full block, 100%, against another candidate, stacking the odds. And this is kind of what I see happening in New Zealand. We're allowing all kinds of people coming in from the Global Compact that Winston Peters signed that he said he wasn't going to. And we're going to have some ethnic variations in New Zealand that will take control of our government. In fact, we see that right now in the Maori groups. They're wanting some pretty tough stuff right now.
So you're concerned about possible interference from overseas migration, specifically for the purpose. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That it's 20% of the population in New Zealand right now was not born here. You and I both fall into that category. And when we go back and look at, let's say, the Boston bombing during the marathon that was there, that was the first or second generation of people that had come into the country. So even though you have a, quote, melting pot in the States, and theoretically you would have the same thing of a melting pot in New Zealand. I've got a bigger suspicion it's probably not going to melt quite as well over here as it is in the States.
So, I mean, what we're talking about is integration into the country or into the resident society of new immigrants, which is, I mean, of course, this has been something that, in fact, I've personally asked Seymour this question, and I mean, I think I've told you and our audience, I might have told you and our audience before about his response to that. So we'll get back to the US election then. And so Trump, you are obviously a clear supporter of Trump.
Yes.
We can't quite see your T-shirt because the camera is not quite angled correct. But there you go. Yes. Now, a lot of people don't like Trump because they see him as bombastic, as polarizing. They've called him racist, of course. They've said a lot of things about him because, well, I guess he's very open about what he thinks on Twitter. He's quite different from your standard US president. He sort of fires from the hip, so to speak. So tell me why you support Trump. And I mean, obviously you are a evidence-based person with your professional background in that. So perhaps go into what you see as some of his achievements.
Yeah, I did it earlier, and I don't have it with me right now, but I've got 4 pages of Trump accomplishments over the last 3.5 years, 4 years now. And they have been absolutely significant, not only in guns, but the entire economy. You got to remember that we had a quote from Obama going back that the GDP would be, I don't remember, 2.5%. And he said people are just going to have to get used to it. Well, shortly after Trump came in, he got it over 3%. So we started having extreme growth. And then he got rid of regulations, which allowed businesses to expand. We became an exporter of coal when Hillary said she was going to stop it, shut all the coal mining down. We are a self-sufficient country in our energy resources, and even to the point of exporting some of the other stuff, some of the natural gases. So Trump has done everything that he said he was going to do to stimulate the economy. And if you look at the stock market, it's up to around almost 29,000. And when Obama was leaving, it was just barely over 10. So the stock market has gone up between 2 and 3%, 200 and 300% of what it was. Legal wise, I'm glad we got through the fake Russian involvement in the presidential campaign. And I'm really looking forward to the investigation into Burisma, the $33 million that Hunter Biden got from the Chinese. There are going to be a lot of things coming out. But the other thing that falls in with all of this is that in order for all this to have been portrayed in the fashion that it has, you've had to have a media that was complicit to it. And if you look at CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, they are nothing but anti-Trump organizations. New York City, New York Post, for example, is another one. And we don't know what Jacinda said to Mershon when she was talking to some of the people in Facebook and all that. But one of the things that I do is I do a lot of studies, as you may be aware of. And one of the things that I go back to is Wikipedia. Boy, have I gotten a real startle out of that. I went back to look up Operation 40, which was involved in the revolt against Castro in 1960 and potentially the Kennedy assassination. It's completely changed from what it was a month ago. So somebody is going in and changing all these. Well, I contacted Wikipedia about that, and they said, well, yeah, from time to time they do change these things. So my suggestion is why don't we have the option to go back and review what was previously posted? So I'm waiting for a response on that. So what it is, we have people meddling in history and how it's written and portrayed. Yeah, so that's kind of a legacy of Obama.
Okay. So like I said, going back to Trump's achievements, and how do you think he's going to get around this media blanket? And how do you think we can do that here?
How can we do it over here? We can't do it over here. When you just had $125 million spent, 50 before the election, 75 after the election for the media. And Jacinda said, oh, it's to save the company from going out of business, TV3, I think it was, and Radio New Zealand. And part of that was involved with Rupert Murdoch. Well, that's quite interesting. Business is making profit. So anytime you sell advertising, it's to keep you from going out of business. Well, why is it nobody's spending money with advertising with these corporations? It's because nobody trusts them. They have no audience anymore. So the other question that you had before, and I really want to get back to that, was the speech patterns of Trump. And I said this before Trump got into the election. I said, people in the United States and probably around the world are going to have difficulty taking hold of Trump because people in New York City have a different speech pattern. They're braggadocious, almost arrogant to most people. And I said, we're going to have to get over that and get past it to see what the man can do. So he's done.
Okay. So what you're talking about is Trump's personality coming out, being quite different to all previous presidents,
Right.
And why people find him quite difficult as a president to accept.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Keep going. Yep.
Yeah, so I've been to 47 of the 50 U.S. states and several countries around the world. And there's two states that I really don't like. One is New York, and the second is California. I avoid them like a plague. I also avoid big cities like Chicago, St. Louis, particularly East St. Louis. As a white person, you go in there, you may not come out alive. And that's no exaggeration. You may remember Ferguson, Missouri, where they had the riots there that Obama tried to prop up. And this is another part of the problem that we've got right now is Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And when you go and look at what Obama is doing right now, he's promoting both of those. He's promoting the unrest in the United States. And Trump is trying to quell it all. But the problem is he's limited by federal law as to what he can do about sending in U.S. Army reserves. He can't send in Army, full-time Army, because it would violate what was referred to as posse comitatus laws. So it basically falls down to the governors and city mayors to request what is referred to as the National Guard, which is the state guard. And they can come in and stop all of these riots and all that. Well, you've got Democratic governors like Cuomo in New York, who's not going to do that. He's going to let the riots play out in order to try and make Trump look bad. So we have intentional acts by governors, mayors, trying to stifle the admiration that, let's face it, over 50% of the Americans have for Trump. And the other thing is when the police come to me and complain about me voting for Trump, what they're complaining about is they're going to take half the United States on that voted for Trump and say that we're all fascists and racist. It doesn't work for me. And I'm neither. I've got friends on every spectrum.
Yeah.
So how do we get around this thing? I think the thing is we really have got to sit down as conservatives and take a media organization over that we control. We put the information out. We associate to organizations like Fox News and several others. We've got at least 5 good websites on the internet, on Facebook and YouTube right now, that give out some really good information. So now we need to take this and pass it on to the next level, to the general populace. And I think this is one of the problems that we had in our election, which becomes kind of a general situation. And I refer to it as the preacher is preaching to the choir, but the choir is standing behind him, and he doesn't have a congregation out there to talk to. So he's only talking to his own supporters. We've now got to go outside of our own supporters and get to the general populace and get past a lot of this garbage that's been put out about, we got to make 5% and all that. All we needed was one new conservative candidate to be in parliament. And you see now you got one Maori vote in there, and they're going to get a say, and they'll be listened to by the media. So
okay, now back. Thank you, Mitch. Now back to the U.S. election.
Yep.
You touched on Hunter Biden's issues coming up now and ahead of the election. So can you just elaborate on that just a little bit?
Okay, you may have remembered something about Joe Biden making some statements about the Ukrainian oil company, that he had got a hold of the government and was trying to, Daniel, was trying to get one of the prosecutors fired so that there wouldn't be any allegations to tie Hunter and Biden to the Burisma oil producing over there. And he got him fired, and he was bragging about it right on TV. He can't deny it anymore. Then there's the issue of Biden taking Air Force number 2, which is the backup for the president's plane, and he took it to China with Hunter Biden, and they came back with a $33 million deal. So Hunter has no background in the fields that he's getting into, but getting paid. So it's obviously a bribe coming from basically nepotism of his father being the vice president. Hillary gets involved in this as well. Remember, she was Secretary of State under Obama. She is facing some degree of prosecution under the lies that she told Congress during the investigation in Benghazi. And let me back up a little bit on that. What Ambassador Stevenson was doing in Benghazi was trying to recover about 5 missiles, surface to air, that had been sold to one of the North African countries and then ended up in Libya. Well, these were not sold by the CIA. These were actually sold by the State Department outside of the CIA issues. So that's why Stevenson was over there trying to get these. Stevenson was in the compound requesting air support and some aid to get him out of the compound when he was under attack. The Air Force in another country, the U.S. Air Force in another country, was on standby, ready to go. And they stood them down. They wouldn't let them fly. And this is where you end up having all of this, the ex-SEALs, the CIA compound from about 6 blocks away, trying to go over there. They went there and found that his body had been removed and taken to the hospital, and he was already dead.
I think, I remember this very well, and I think our audience will also realize that this was very well documented in a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's even been turned into a movie. But it's interesting that, of course, Hillary Clinton is still involved in all of this. Somewhere behind, in the shadows behind Joe Biden, who's now the Democratic front runner. And of course, they're all still somehow in the mix. Strangely enough, just like Helen Clark is still somewhere in the mix behind the Labour Party here.
Yeah.
And of course, now we've got Trump. Now, how do you rate Trump's chances of getting reelected?
Good question. I don't believe the polls. I did believe the polls during Brexit. They said that it was going to fail, and it passed by over 5% margin. Hillary had a 93% chance on the Young Turks program that was being run in 2016. I just got through reviewing that. It's hilarious that she was going to win, 93% chance of winning, and then they had to go through all the gyrations of each state going to President Trump in the process. So you look at the polls right now, and they give Biden a slight edge. No, it's not going to happen. My suspicion is that Trump will win by not less than a 5% and probably closer to 7 or more percent gap. So,
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to leave New Zealand in a lurch in the end of this, because we have a lot of end user certificates of contracts, everything from C-130s, firearms, light armor vehicles that the military has over here, and the Five Eyes system that New Zealand is involved with. In fact, that may have been part of the system that they used to ask me the question that I had I seen a video on YouTube, or they made the accusation that I'd seen the video on YouTube, which I had, and nothing really wrong with it. So the spy agency could be potentially pulled. Some of the trade agreements with New Zealand could be potentially pulled. We got to remember, New Zealand signed the Belt and Road with CCP. They took on the 5G system from China, which the United States has been trying to stop. New Zealand's not been very cooperative here lately, and I think there's going to be retribution at some point.
Do you see New Zealand as so? You see New Zealand as having stood apart from its traditional allies, and of course we've seen that Australia's gone conservative, so has the UK, and then and the US. By your thinking, is likely to remain conservative, and so with this second term that Trump will get, New Zealand is basically isolated.
Yeah,
is that right?
And if you have watched some of the broadcast and newspaper articles coming from Australia, they're going on, how could we be so crazy to have elected Jacinda Ardern? So even the Australians are at odds as to why she was elected. And one of the things that I had during the first election was that she was not directly elected as the head of the parliament, because that was done by the cooperation of the various other parties that voted her in as the prime minister. This time it was an outright vote for her.
Correct.
And boy, when the farmers say that they voted for Labor to keep the Green Party out, something is really wrong with that concept. It doesn't work. And some of the things about looking at the party votes versus the candidate votes throughout New Zealand, it doesn't seem to match up either. And I know that another guy on the internet who's got the program on YouTube, he's coming up with the same conclusion, but he's making the accusation that he thinks there's a conspiracy. I don't know that there is, and I'm not even going to promote that concept. But there's some things that are really fishy here.
Well, look, we've still got the special votes that are being counted this week, and
the two referendum.
And the two referenda. So there's a lot still to come out. But I think the key thing here is that, it's very likely that you feel Trump will get in.
Yes.
And that we're going to remain, basically, our allies are going to stay conservative, and it's not going to work as New Zealand on its own. Of course, with China also playing up in the South China Sea and the other seas all around us, and basically all of the South Asian countries feeling threatened, including India.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be interesting times ahead for New Zealand, particularly as, we might very well be isolated as pretty much the only country with a socialist government in charge. And if we're slowly alienating our allies, where do we end up from here? So,
where do we end up from here? That's a real good question. This is where I go back to my history studies. If you look from 1917, when the Russian imperialist Russians were thrown out, the White Russians, and the Reds came in, the battles that they created, the civil unrest, They promoted socialism around the world, Marxism at that point, and then later on Leninism. I really have a big fear that we're heading in that same direction right now of how far are we going to go with socialism before we try and turn it around. And when we get to a certain point, can we turn it around? So this is why I take special notation to the Spanish Revolution, the French Revolution, and the fascist revolt or the fascist rise in Italy. How many ways can we split ourselves if things start going wrong? It can really go wrong bad. It can go wrong really quick, particularly if you promote or you allow Antifa and Black Lives Matter to continue on. So that's something between both the United States and New Zealand, but apparently New Zealand and Jacinda is going to permit it to happen.
Well, interesting times ahead for us indeed. Well, thank you very much, Mitch. I think our time is up. We've done the half an hour, and we'll let our very good audience carry on with their evening and you with yours. So thanks again, Mitch, and we'll have to do this again.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria. Try and get that computer fixed next time.
Very good.
All right,
okay, bye.
Bye-bye.